This artwork by Matusha is a 3-channel video called Avatar. Well, it begins with a set of women relaxing on a beach, sort of looking at kind of surprisingly religious texts like the Bible, as well as playing with prayer beads. Gradually reveals itself to be a carefully constructed illusion, since by the end of this video, the camera zooms out, and what you thought was a beach turns out to simply have been a pile of sand within a construction truck. Painting by Anna Asghar, a Detroit-based painter, draw on her archives of magazines collected by her mother, in particular beauty magazines that come from Pakistan. And each of the paintings reflects on the relationship between beauty culture and advertising, as well as modernist painting. So what she's really interested in here is, for example, the relationship between the surface of a painting and the surface of skin. And you can see in this one, it's hard to see on video, but if you look really closely, there's actually a slightly, a very light, almost imperceptible sentence that says 23 weeks to a fairness like never before. And this fairness is, of course, punning on kind of fair skin and the kind of standards of white beauty, but also the kind of hints at something political, kind of fairness as in a form of justice. I Sing My Heart For You is a work by the Hong Kong-based duo Come Inside, and it's a kind of melancholic, almost manic reflection on the highly feminized culture of performance, and in particular of kind of princess-style female adolescence. So the artwork has the words "Come Inside," which is the name of the collective, on the top, together with the "Happy Birthday Princess" balloon arch, as well as 2 microphones that can be attached to your phone to sing on. The heart-shaped stage has also been used for different programs. It can be folded and moved around. Over the course of the exhibition, the balloons gradually start to droop and the surface of the stage gets dirtier. And what became a kind of pristine image gets dirtied, trampled, kind of more used with life, and takes on some of the signs of the passage of time. This work by Xia Die, a Shanxi artist who's now based in Beijing and is highly skilled in the traditional forms of northern Chinese paper cutting, is a reflection on his identity and his sort of search for beauty in everyday life as an older gay man. In this paper cut, you'll see, and each of these paper cuts is made by hand without drafting. He improvises them. On the right, you'll see a woman together with a baby inside of a home. And on the left, you'll see 2 men having sex outside of that home. And this work is called Door because, as Xia Die says, it's about that line between the inside and the outside, between, on the one hand, freedom, and on the other hand, security. Or, for example, on the one hand, risk, and on the other hand, sort of the sense of being trapped. So that balance is what is the reasoning behind his choosing to create a series of work around doors. This work can be viewed from both sides because it's a paper cut, and we've chosen to frame it within this glass piece. The colors within here are all from traditional dyes used for making colored breads that are very classical and typical of Shanxi province. And Xia Die's name it's a pseudonym that is short for bauhinia, which means Siberian butterfly, a name that he chose for himself to express his desire to find beauty and to survive in sort of punishingly cold environments like a butterfly in Siberia. This work by Huang Mo, a Chicago-based artist whose work often deals with language, diaspora, and political activism, focuses on a text from 1944. She has been working with a play called New Women by the playwright Hudin Long, one of the seminal figures of Vietnamese modern literature. And in this play, which closely echoes a 1930s Chinese film with the same name, New Women, you can see a very promising and talented writer, To Lan, kind of is entrapped by her editor and social pressures over time, and her magazine, New Women, is forced to close down, and she's driven to, it's not quite clear, but it may even be death. And it's really a kind of interesting play because it's a reflection on the relationship between feminism, careerism, capitalism in a very important moment of Vietnamese history, but it reflects also on the experience in general of all women who have sought to kind of express themselves or sort of seek excellence within their work and have been held back from achieving those goals because of various figures in their life, figures of power, often masculine. And what Huang Mo has done in this play is that she's actually removed all the male parts, so only the women voices remain. And what you get is a kind of very fragmented, very partial story. But those gaps are maybe places where Huang hopes that we can insert our own stories or kind of expand to take up more space. This will also be used as the set of a play, of a reading, a dramatic reading of this play next week, which is to say at the end of August. This artwork is by Christopher Cahill. It's called I Personally Believe, and that title comes from a typical answer of the pageant question. So if one is asked, what do they want? What would they do if they had one wish, for example? Typically people answer world peace. Pageant contestants will often use the sentence, I personally believe, to start their phrasing. Each of these works is a different interpretation of pageant culture. And they've been made in paper, cast from molds that Chris has made. The paper itself comes from pads of drawing paper, the kind that would be normally used in art schools. And each of the pads is underneath the sculpture, hanging on the podium. You can see the drawing on the front of the pad, framed and partially blurred out by a piece of vellum paper. And each of these drawings, which is very interesting to Chris, each of these drawings is selected through a competition. So every year the drawing company or the art supplies company will have competition, and the kind of amateur fans who purchase that paper might submit their own drawings, and if they're lucky they'll be printed on there. And what I think Chris is interested in is how that's almost a pageant of its own as well. I think he's interested in how competition as a structure is all throughout our lives. Not just in a beauty pageant on television, but also in when people are applying for jobs, also when people are sort of applying for visibility as artists. Even these artworks are kind of in a competition with each other. They're kind of standing next to each other as if they're lined up like contestants of Miss Hong Kong. This work by Doreen Chan is called Melting as Usual. It's a site-specific installation that was, like most of the works in this show, commissioned just for us. And it's part of Doreen's reflection on the relationship between time and materiality. These objects are meant to look as if they're expanded versions of butter, as you'd see it in kind of the small hotel convenience packets. It's called Melting as Usual because over the course of the exhibition, the plaster objects actually that are meant to look like butter sink into the foam and seem to crush the photograph underneath it, which is a kind of very casual, candid photograph of a subway. This work by Jess Fan is called Disposed to Add, and it's a reflection on the relationship between queer culture and bodybuilding. In particular, in a place like Hong Kong, where for example, access to hormones for trans people is highly restricted. The power to shape your body through practices like bodybuilding is not only pleasurable and aesthetic, it can actually really be a part of one's identity and a practice of self-transformation. It can be really actually revolutionary. And what What Jess's work often will do is take hard things and make them soft, take masculine things and make them feminine, and the other way around, to really explore the boundary between these perceived opposites. These are all barbells and they've been cast in silicone in different tones of skin. What you'll see over here is 5 small dumbbells that have been cast in soap. So these can be used, and Jess is drawing a connection between the practice of washing oneself and the practice of lifting weights, since they're both ways of maintaining and improving one's body. These art objects are used in a performance also called Disposed to Add, in which 2 figures pull almost like through a process of tug of war and play with the barbell, stretching them out as far as they can, tying each other up with them. It's a very playful social process, because for Jess, it's not just about changing one's body in relation to oneself, but changing one's body in relation to other bodies.